The 2025 Southern Summer Conference with USTA Louisiana, Dr. Mark Kovacs, grips dictate swing paths and swing paths dictate contact points.
Mark Kovacs, head of ITPA, which is fitness and biomechanical and health modules and certifications. It's much more complex than I can describe. He was an All-American at Auburn. He was the NCAA doubles champion. He is from Australia. He is kind of the go-to guy for all things biomechanical and health related for tennis, and he's involved with golf and other sports as well. So we're fortunate to have it. Mark?
Awesome. Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. First off, thank you all for making the time. I know you could be doing a lot of things on a Saturday, so I appreciate you spending it with us. I'm going to be using the screen a lot, so if you can't move the screen, try to move over, get as close to it as you can, because there's going to be a lot of visuals today. I want to thank Bill, I want to thank Pat as well, and the entire team that put this on, because these events aren't easy to do, and they really do make a good impact. Our whole goal is how do we make better players, how do we keep more players in the game longer, and to me the easiest way to do that is a combination of how much fun can we have and how much better can we make them over time. The better someone is at something, the more likely they're going to continue to do it. So my goal is how do we make better players, really. That's where I live. I live in that world of player development, of improving technique, improving movement, improving mental skills, improving everything that goes into making competitive players. But today should apply to pretty much everyone you're working with. If you're working with early stage juniors, this will apply. If you're working with adult leagues, this should apply. So we're going to be talking about the forehand, and I use this term a lot. The grips dictate the swing paths, and the swing paths dictate the contact positions. So if you want to fix contact, you've got to think about what is the grip and what is the swing path before you worry about what is contact, because contact's a result of the previous two. Too many times people go straight to contact because as tennis players, as tennis coaches, our number one instinct is to think racket hit ball. We're pretty simple creatures. We have a big implement and we have a small implement, and those two collide. And that's all we do. Hit a yellow thing that is moving as consistently as we can, which is the simplest way to coach tennis. But as we know, there's a lot of moving parts to get to that good solid contact position. So as we go along, I want to make sure that we make this interactive, so please feel free to ask questions, because there's some fundamentals that are consistent among all strokes when it comes to the basic physics of movement and how the body and the racket moves through space and makes contact. And then there's a lot of stylistic aspects. And I never talk too much about style, meaning that I observe style, I understand style, but that's your job as coaches on a daily basis. The personal differences, why does every forehand look a little bit different? There's some fundamental reasons why that's true, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But then there's a lot of stylistic differences. How long does your non-dominant hand stay on the racket? It's a little bit of style. You know, some people can keep that non-dominant hand on longer, which you may like, but someone else may not. That is somewhat irrelevant, but it does have an impact. Style can have an impact on the fundamental. So think through that lens a little bit as we're talking about this. So a question here. Sorry, I'm trying to use this. I'm going to be gentle. So if you see that on a player, how many of you are like, that's acceptable, I'm good with it? How many of you are like, I have to change that? And you start sweating and you start having night sweats about a player that looks like that, and you want to change that immediately? How many say I'm good with it? That's kind of how a lot of my players look, and I let them hit like that. Raise your hand. I'm just curious this is not a right or wrong. There's a range here. So a lot of people will be like, I don't really like that. They're breaking the plane. There's too big a backswing. It's not pretty enough for me. So I tell people that if you can win Grand Slams hitting like this, you can't say it's wrong. So if we have a look, all these people do it all the time. They've all won Grand Slams, so you cannot make an argument this is incorrect. You may not like it, it may bring in more error sometimes on certain balls, it may create some challenges in certain environments, but you definitely can't say that that's a bad forehand or that should never be hit. because I always say, if you can make millions of dollars doing something, how can you convince me that it's wrong? So that's step one, is we're trying to analyze our players and think about how do we teach. I know a lot of people that hate this. They don't want to teach it. They don't want to accept it. They're going to have everyone, if I'm hitting this way, the racket's never going to go past about here. It's going to be always on this side of the body, which is okay. That's not bad either. There's plenty of players that do that and are very successful. So we have to understand those differences. Questions on that, because that usually gets a little bit of discussion.
I got one for you.
Yeah.
Two things. It's got to be a little bit of a slower ball coming to them to do that, I would think.
Correct.
And what do you see from the men's side?
So the men's side don't do it as much.
Okay.
Okay? And what is the reason for that?
Speed of ball.
There are plenty of men that still do it. It's not like it's 100%. Speed of ball has a lot to do with it. It's a great point.
Strength and flexibility, is that
It's a great question. Strength probably more than flexibility, and also potentially when they were young, what would happen? They didn't get as powerful as early, so the ball speed was slower, and they learned that a lot longer because they wanted to generate pace off a slower ball. So there's some of that. And then possibly grips come into it a little bit, and we'll talk about where grips come into this as well. But yeah, great questions. That's why it's a really interesting discussion. And some people are very black and white on this. It's always fun for me to sort of poke holes at their argument when people are black and white on something like this, because I just want my players to win matches, and if you can win millions of dollars doing it a certain way, I'm good with it. The question is, how much do we make adjustments with the juniors? Because obviously we don't want a lot of juniors like this all the time.
It seems like they don't have as much control. Like think of the fact, I have a friend that does that.
Yeah.
She'd be much better. She could shorten back.
I'm totally in agreement with what you said. The bigger the backswing, the less easier it is to control it. There's no doubt about it. You've got more time that you have to go from here to get to there. Remember, our goal is contact zone. If anyone plays golf, they have the same concept. You can do whatever you want really back here, as long as you get on plane in this motion and make contact there. Whatever you've done beforehand, there's a lot of stuff. As long as you hit certain key positions or key fundamentals on the path. So I'm not saying I like that. I'm not saying I teach that. I'm just saying if they do that, be careful about how much you're going to change it.
Mark? Yeah. What do you see on injuries when the more rec-type players are doing it more from their arm going back instead of their torso rotating?
It's great. I think I planted, because that's a perfect question. So what Pat's getting at there is the body versus the arm. Tennis is a full body sport. We're MMA on a court. We're a full body contact sport, but a lot of people don't realize that. If you watch a lot of players, what do? They do a lot of stuff just with the arm. And one, you can't get as much pace that way, so you're hurting your performance. Two is you put a lot of strain on your elbow and your shoulder specifically, which leads to more injuries. And three, you don't get as much control if you do that right. You've only got a shorter window of area you can hit to. So we have to always engage the lower body first, because that's really what tennis is. We're a ground-up sport. We use the ground, we load through the body, and then we transfer through the upper body. The upper body really isn't our power generator. Our lower body is our power generator, because we have to use the ground. And then our upper body is used to transfer whatever power we've created through the lower body. And that's where some people, I think, get it wrong, is they think, okay, I've just got to use my arm. And you can get a little bit of power on there with the arm, you're still using the ground though, because you're pushing into the ground. The moment you can actually turn your hips and rotate and load and get specifically the back leg or the outside leg, depending on your stance, engaged as much as possible, that's where the magic happens. So really, really good point, Pat. It's like really important that we don't think of it as an upper body motion. So question for you, is this a good position? How many of you, if you see this on a player, would you say the wrist is laid back? That's really what we're getting at here. Would you be okay with that? Again, there's not a right or wrong, so don't feel bad about how you answer it. I'm just probing. I'm just trying to get you to think when you're looking at players, what are you looking at and what is acceptable and what is sort of unacceptable. So let's do a quick poll, because I've actually did a poll online with this photo, and I'll show you what other people think so you can compare yourself. So how many people would say, yeah, that's acceptable, I'm good with that? How many people say, no, I change that? A few people. Yeah, so you see the room's a bit split.
I don't teach lefties.
Great point. I'm a lefty, by the way, so he's given me a jab with that one. Yeah. So
I can't tell.
What did the great world of social media tell us? Yeah, that's our barometer for everything these days. So I put it out there, and again, could be parents, this could be anyone. So this was the outcome. So it's basically split. This is a very unscientific poll, by the way. This had we didn't know who was answering. We just put it out there. It could be parents, it could be players, it could be bots, I'm not sure. So don't take this and run with it. But my point of doing this is just to say, as good as we all are and think we are, there's still disconnect on not everyone's in agreement, which is great. That means that there may be more than one way to do it, and also it's a snapshot in time. We didn't really account for grip there when we were looking at this. A full Western versus an Eastern is going to have a very different position there. You know, that's really important to make that differential. You know, the age plays a role potentially in some of this. And what type of ball they're trying to hit. Are they trying to hit a forcing ball? Are they trying to hit a defensive ball? Are they trying to add shape? Are they trying to flatten it out? That all plays a role in that as well. So taking a snapshot in time and not putting it in context is a risky play when we're talking about technique. So again, the point of me showing a couple of these early on is to just get the mind thinking and ask yourself those questions. When some of us, what we do every day, we have I would say a pretty consistent way of looking at things. I do as well. I have a certain way of looking at when I analyze. You all do, I'm sure. Just be careful that we don't get so comfortable in that way of looking at things that we don't take into account that a lot of this stuff, there could be some splits, there could be some different ways of doing things. Question on that? Make some sense? Okay, so as you can see here, I'm just putting some photos on showing that contact points are really important, but grips dictate swing pass, which dictate contact positions. Everyone remember Edberg? What grip did he have?
Mostly continental, huh?
Very close. Eastern forehand or continental, somewhere in that zone. No one really has that grip anymore. You know, Del Potro is probably the last good forehand to get somewhat close to an Eastern forehand. You know, but pretty much since Del Potro, there really hasn't been anyone that's even close to that type of grip. So how many of us teach that? I'm not sure. That's a question for all of you. Why has that changed? Like, you had a lot of people with an Eastern forehand to close to, not really a full continental, but you know, an Eastern forehand 10, 15 years ago. Now you really don't see any at the pro level. The height? Yeah, height of people is a big one. The spin.
Height of ball coming in.
The height of ball as well. That's a great point.
Doing the strings like
The equipment.
Yep, the equipment changed the game, obviously, especially the poly strings and the ability to generate more RPMs. The ability to generate more RPMs changed how the grips adapted. Was that a coaching change, or was that a body adjustment, player adjustment to the change in spin? And the only way you can hit spin off spin is to have a grip like that. Because when a ball's coming at you with a lot of spin, it's really hard to flatten it out. It can be done, but it's harder than going back with the same type of spin that it's coming at you. So that, I just wanted to show some positions, and then we're going to talk about contact points a lot, but where is the arm in space when it comes to contact points? So this slide, people remember Laver? Everyone says, you know, the modern stroke. Laver had pretty modern strokes. He had open stances, and he had, you know, semi-western grips for certain balls, and he had lag. That's a lag forehand. So the game hasn't changed as much as people want to make the argument. There's obviously differences. The speed of the ball has changed. The rackets have changed. The strings have changed. So there is evolution and there is differences in what you do. But for certain shots, they were hitting very similar shots as what we see today. Not on all the balls because they didn't have to. But on some balls, you see things like that. If everyone remember Bill Tilden in the 20s, he had topspin. It wasn't like his ball was super flat all the time. It was over the shoulder finish. Yeah, Nadal copied Bill Tilden. You know, we can, so we have to think about it from the perspective of what game are we teaching, and it's not that different to how it was taught 100 years ago. There's obviously differences, but we have to not throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to what have we learned from history and what can we apply today. So this stat, I think a lot of people have seen it. Females can hit the ball harder than guys at the pro level. You know how that happens? They have less spin. It's not that complicated.
It's velocity.
This is purely velocity. The guys have more RPMs typically on their ball. So if you have a look here, this is average. This is not one shot. This is the average for the event. So the average spin on a professional ATP player is much higher than a WTA player. So the goal here is to understand, do you want spin or do you want pace? You can't have both. You can have both at a high level, but if you want to maximize one, you have to decrease the other. So that's another thing that goes into teaching the forehand. Is your player going to be a flatter, faster ball, or are they going to have a spinnier, higher RPM ball? And you know, when you talk heaviness, that concept of heaviness, that's a combination of pace and spin. And ideally for most people, that's probably where we want to get to. We don't want to be completely flat because that's margin is limited, risk is higher, and we don't want to be completely spinny because then the ball's going to not travel through the air fast enough and it's going to sit up for many players. So we've got to find this ideal heaviness and this RPM and pace comparison. So think about that when you're teaching as well. Because if I want to teach super flat, I know I'm going to have more of an eastern grip. My swing path's going to be shallower. I'm going to come through the contact zone longer, and I'm going to hit the ball flatter. If I want to have more spin, my grip becomes semi-western to western, somewhere in that zone. I'm going to have more lag. I'm going to have my racket lower through the contact zone, so lower to higher, and I'm going to usually break off a little earlier, so my extension becomes shorter. One's not right and one's not wrong. It's a different ball. It's a different game. Flat tennis versus spin tennis is two different sports. So that's where it gets challenging when we're talking about teaching, because I haven't even talked about what ball's coming to you. Now we have to take into account the height of the ball coming to you, the pace of the ball coming to you, where you stand in the court. All those factors dictate what ball I want to hit back. So it gets real interesting when we start taking in all those variables, and all of you are experienced coaches, all of you have a way of teaching the forehand. My goal today is to have you just ask yourself questions about, am I taking into account enough of these factors, and am I adjusting to the game and to the players that I work with? Okay, questions on that? Back outside leg. How many of you take into account this when we're really working through the stroke mechanics? Because if you're not starting with the outside leg or the back leg, depending, when I say outside or back, it's the same leg. For a right-hander, it's the right leg. If you're going to be more square stance, it's back leg. If you're going to be more semi-open or open, it's outside leg. Same thing. So it's that back outside leg that has to load, that has to use the ground, that has to store energy so we can release energy. And always coach through that lens. Don't start with the racket at contact, unless you're talking about a real beginner. Like if you're talking about a real beginner, I'll let Wayne talk about that, and Craig, they'll really talk about that in more detail. But I'm talking about someone that has some context of where the ball is in space, and they can put racket on ball pretty consistent, and they want to get better. We always have to start with legs ground up, and then through the racket.
What's your thoughts on starting with beginner? The open stance. I mean, some people say, you need to start it immediately, but I've always thought that. They need to learn the basics first.
I always say, and I'll defer to Wayne on this, but I always say we teach them what's easiest for them at day one, and then you adapt. They're kids, they can adapt, or even if they're adults, they'll adapt. But Wayne, do you have any thoughts on that? If you're going to teach someone from day one and they've never played?
Yeah, so the challenge with the open stance is, again, the disassociation between upper and lower body. So like if I'm just standing there and I do my arm, that's not, yes, you're open, but it's not very good. So in order for a beginner to use the body, actually this square stance, they can handle heights easier, they can start to engage their body a little bit more. So it's simpler and there's a little more success. So it's okay if they have open stance on some shots. It's just they're going to have a really, really bad one.
Yeah, simple early is always the way I would lean.
Everybody's talking that way.
Everyone's talking that way, so you guys don't hear it.
No, sorry.
No, I'll repeat the question. Yeah.
And it was really good.
Yeah. I forgot what he said.
Yeah.
But he basically said square stance is a little bit easier than open stance when you're teaching a beginner, and he gave a couple of examples why. There's a full presentation on the female forehand. If you go to Kovacs Institute, it's free, so you can kind of go into more detail there on that. And I'll send you some links out. I'll give Bill some links. So this was in the New York Times a couple of years ago. I'm just using this to guide our discussion. But the start, I have a lot of kind of thoughts on the start because so many people focus on that. It doesn't affect me very much, so I usually don't worry about the start unless there's a big issue later on. So sometimes we'll go back to the start and fix it, but usually, this becomes the important stage. So when we're talking about turn, the problem in tennis language is everyone says shoulder turn. I always say hip turn because that's really where it starts. It's related, hip and shoulders are always related, but if you say hip turn, you're going to get your outcome 100% of the time. If you say shoulder turn, you may get shoulders turned and the hips haven't moved. So if you say hip turn, your shoulders move with your hips. So if you're using the term shoulder turn, it's not incorrect. It's just you may only get the result you want 70% of the time. So think about hip turn versus shoulder turn. Non-dominant hand, does it have to stay on the racket? And how long does it stay on the racket? So my preference on that, and again I say preference because Chris Evans had a pretty good forehand. What did she do? She separated real early. There's quite a few players that separate early. If you separate early, you still got to get hip turn and you still got to get shoulder turn. You can do it. It doesn't require the left hand on the racket for a right-hander, but it just makes it harder. So usually you'll have left hand on the racket, usually the chest line. That's the starting point. Some people may go a little further, some people may go a little less. But usually I say the midline of the body, if you can keep that non-dominant hand on the racket till the midline of the body, you're going to get most of what you need out of that. And it's really, really useful, especially when you're working with people that have a lot of sort of movement going on or their swing's too big or something like that. It'll help shorten up the swing. The other thing you want to think about is how high the tip of the racket is above the head. Some players will go real high, big backswing. Some people will go real short, real low. So you've got this range of acceptability. You don't want to be too high. Not many people are too low. Now, there are some people that will take the racket back real low like this. But in general, it's hard to be too low. It's real easy to be really high. So be careful when you get too high, because it goes back to the comment earlier. It's not necessarily wrong. There are players that have done it and have been successful with it. But it just makes it a lot harder to catch up to your contact zone. So be cautious on the height of the backswing. I'm going to go through all the tech stuff pretty quick.
You got a question?
Yeah.
Can you go back to the slide? So this slide illustrates something I've been talking to a lot of my advanced versus non-advanced players.
Can you maybe speak up a little just so the people behind can hear?
A lot of my less advanced players struggle with posture. I've been having them just straight up and down with their spine and try to get lower with their legs. I've been trying a hard divide. Like my advanced players, I will teach the lean you see here with the shoulders a little more down and a more loaded position there. And then anyone I don't know, like 3-5 or lower, or that I don't think is going to be like a player, I'm just like, just stand up straight because they can't balance well enough to use their hands. Is there like a certain level you would say, or would you completely disagree with that?
No. If everyone heard that, it was about posture and staying tall with the spine rather than being more bent over. And he has some differences between levels. At less advanced players, they'll have a very straight spine, and then more advanced players have a little bit more flexibility in the way they prepare. I would agree with you. I think the question becomes at the less advanced level, is that the biggest priority? That would be my only question to you. Like I always say, you want to determine who commits the murder, not who's driving the getaway car. So is that, if you only had 3 things to work on, would that be one of the top 3? I'm not sure if posture at a 3.0 or 2.5 level is your biggest issue. I would say it's probably grips, it's probably take back, it's probably trying to get to a contact point. Could posture relate to it? For sure. But how many tips or comments or points or things are you going to put in a player's head? And if posture is one of them, that means you may have to remove another cue that you're trying to work through. So that would be my only question, because I agree with you, posture is a huge thing, but how would you incorporate that into how you're teaching?
So to your point about like starting with the root of the problem, and I guess I'm dealing with lower level juniors and adults, and my main focus in this is like I'll tell them to pull their elbows off their body as they turn. Like I don't tell them if it's the hips or the elbows, but like I don't care if their hands separate, but as long as there's a space with the elbows. Is that like too little information I'm giving them?
No, did everyone hear that? It was actually really good. It was about pushing your elbows away from your body during the take back. So all that's spacing. Other people will call that, hey, we want more spacing between the elbows and the body. Some people will put a flotation device, like for kids, you put the floaties on to give you space. There's other things you can do for that. It's great. Your cue was a good one as well, is elbows away from the body. You're not saying anything complicated. Pretty much anyone, when you say that, they will do it. Push your elbows away from the body, and it creates that space so you're not too cramped. It's really a good cue for people that are in here. That take the racket back too close. The challenge becomes sometimes it's too far. They, like everything, you give a good tip and then people are so literal that they're like out here. And we've got to be careful with that. But it's a great cue. So yeah, I think that's a really good one.
Do you teach them to set the angle in the prep?
So yes, without saying it though. So setting the angle in the prep is similar to what you were getting at. You want to get that separation angle. You want to have the right angles here. But again, how complicated do we communicate is the challenge. We want to understand it. We want to get them there. We want to see that angle and we want to be in that right position. But I usually don't use those terms. It would just be like you said, elbows away from the body or contact point further away or something like that is a bit easier for them to think through rather than let's set the angle here and get in this position. But yeah, definitely a really good point.
What about in the racket though? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
say that a little bit more.
The racket for the grip.
Yeah? What do you mean exactly though?
I mean, if it was like a lower ball versus a higher ball, you might have a different angle in the prep.
For sure, yeah, and most definitely. If the ball's low, your angle is going to be different than at neutral versus different at high, and the angle position. The challenge there is, do we need to teach that, or do we put them in the right positions and they adapt to that? And the preference is you put them in those positions where they adapt to that. And I think Wayne and Craig are going to talk about some ways to do this, things like that as well. Put your athletes in the right positions so they adapt their technique to what you're trying to accomplish. So that we it's that push-pull. We don't want to pull them to an outcome. We want to gently nudge them in the right direction so that they make some of those decisions themselves. Really good point. So let's talk about locking a little bit, because this locking position gets talked about a lot. It used to be called locking. If you go back in the 80s, this was the position that most people were looking at, butt cap of the racket pointing to the ball. Now a lot of people have used the term lag. It's the same thing. There's no difference. The lag talks more about the racket, the tip of the racket, so you lag in the tip of the racket, but it's really where is the butt cap in space, because that directs the tip. That is we go through the butt cap all the way to the tip. So this you can't replicate unless you understand the grip and unless you understand the height of the ball. So we need to know grip issues. If you've got a full Western grip, you're going to have a very different mechanics than if you've got an Eastern grip. So ask yourself that question before you start talking about locking positions, because they're going to be very, very different. Then what happens is, traditional, if anyone learned with wood rackets, typically you would learn like this. So strings were pointing to the side fence. Bottom of the racket was pointing down. How does everyone hit now? Every racket's like this. String is pointing down at the ground. Is that grip? Mainly. Yeah, that's the main difference. If you're using a continental or an Eastern forehand, that's about as far as you can get the racket down. If I'm using a Western grip, I can get it all the way down. So don't say I want the racket all the way down if they've got an Eastern forehand grip. You physically can't do it. So taking into account the grips is so important when it comes to this position. And then height of the ball changes everything. If we're low, what happens? We have to get the racket below the height of the ball. If the ball's high, you're up here at most. So when you're talking about lag, you're typically talking about a ball that is, chest height or lower. You're not talking about a ball shoulder height usually. I mean, you're getting some lag, but in general, you don't get as much because it's a different ball flight. So take that into account from that perspective. So I got a couple of things to text. So now this is where everyone freaks out. I talk about, because this is contact. This is why you all get paid the big bucks, is to develop consistent contact with all your players. Doesn't matter what grip they have, doesn't matter what swing path they have. If you can make contact work, you're winning. And that's our job, is to make contact as consistent and as reliable as possible under every possible circumstance that we see on the tennis court. So, bent elbow versus straight elbow. What's better? Very good answer. He said depends. You can use that for everything that we talk about. I love that answer and I hate that answer at the same time. Because you're right and you're wrong. So we need to be able to give a better answer than that to a player when they ask, or when they're doing it. So, what determines bent elbow versus straight elbow?
What are you trying to do?
What
the goal is, like what you're trying to do in that situation?
The comment there was, what are you trying to do? To an extent, but there's bigger things than that even. Because there's certain players that can't straighten out their elbow at contact. Who are those? Name some pros that you've seen that they're always bent to contact. Who? Sinner? Yep. Who else? Djokovic? Nadal, not so much. So I wouldn't put him in that same category. I'll show you a couple pictures why. Coco Gauff? Who else? Okay, those three. Let's start with Djokovic, Sinner, Coco. What's the similarity? Grip. What grip do they have?
Western.
They're full Westerns. You cannot straighten your arm out with a full Western. It's physically impossible. Yeah, Swiatek's got probably, if you're going to use, and Djokovic obviously has got a great forehand, and I'll show you why. His is a bit more reliable than Coco's, even though they have the same grip. They have very different swing paths. So his works consistently well, hers doesn't work consistently well. She finds ways to win left and right a lot. She's unbelievable. But her forehand is one of the areas that is a bit more inconsistent than I know she would like. She would like that thing to be like her backhand, which is pretty much rock solid all day, every day. So we'll talk about why. So here's an example. So exact same ball, basically, same contact position. What's the difference that you see here?
much more extended.
Exactly. His contact position, even though, and hers out in front there, so it's got nothing to do with ball in space differences. It's got to do with where their arm is in space and how much bend is in the elbow. You can't fix that at contact. That's an outcome. Contact's the outcome, it's not the cause. So we have to figure out where earlier in the stroke do we make an adjustment to allow for contact to be just a little bit straighter. Obviously that's not fully straight, but it's much straighter. And you get a more reliable contact point. So if you're working with players that have full Westerns, and that's another discussion, should you teach a full Western ever? And depending on the level, at a lot of levels, I don't think you should or need to. It's harder for most players. You know, they get more spin early on, which is why they gravitate to that. The ball's above their head a lot, so it's easier on that ball. But for every other shot they hit, it actually makes life a little bit harder. You can do it, but it just adds a little bit more challenge to how you teach the game. So there's players that have been very successful, some of the best players in the world. So again, going back to the first couple of slides, it's not wrong, it's just sometimes a bit harder through the development cycle. So hopefully this is something you can think about. Okay, the Nadal question, thanks for throwing that out there. So have a look, at a young age, this is very reliable as well. This is not like a one-off. I didn't just find the one thing that supported my goal of this, and it's not like how they hit. He hits like this every single time. I mean, him and Alcaraz actually have very similar forehands. And they got somewhat similar grips as well. So his grip isn't as Western as Djokovic. So and Federer's not as semi-Western as Nadal. So if you take it down the line, you see it's a lot easier to get more extension the less extreme the grip is. But getting full extension through contact is such an important piece of our game. And if you look at all the junior players out there, and most of you are at junior events, you see junior players at your clubs, very few of them have good extension. If you could fix one thing, if you could prioritize one thing when it comes to the stroke, if you can improve their extension through contact, you're going to take care of a lot of their inconsistencies. Because that just makes that contact zone longer, and it allows them to get through the zone longer. Unfortunately, with all the misinformation out there, what do we see online a lot? People talking about, we want more spin, we want to come across the ball more, we want to get through quicker, you got to do this more. That's really, really difficult to do right, and it's not with the arm. I think a lot of people misunderstand what they see on TV. You do see Sinner do that, you do see Djokovic do that, but their swing speed is triple what most of your players are. Your player's swing speed is like this, theirs is like that, and all you see is this, but they're swinging at such a fast rate that you can't apply that swing path to a 3-0 ladies team. Yet people try, and we see it all the time. We see people say, I'm doing what I saw on TV. No, you're not. Your racket speed is 1/3 the speed of what we see on TV. So be really, really careful about trying to mimic what we see the best players in the world do, people that don't hit anything like the best players in the world. So it's a real challenge for all of us. And us as coaches do it, don't we? We say, I want you to serve like that person, or I want you to hit a forehand like that person, which is okay in theory. We want to find the fundamentals that they do, and we want to apply those fundamentals to our players, but we don't want to mimic or copy them exactly, because they can't. They physically can't. Their swing speeds are nowhere close, and many times their grips aren't the same. So if you don't have an ideal comparison, don't compare. And it's hard because everyone wants to say, well, I saw Sinner do this. And I'm like, Sinner's forehand is nearly impossible to replicate for an average person. He has pretty big backswing. His string's facing this way. He gets into this position, and then he gets to contact. So he's got like 4 little hitches in his forehand that most people could not do. Yet he is one of the best ball strikers ever in the game. So he makes it work, because his contact zone is always consistent. But you don't want to teach a 12-year-old that type of forehand. They would be shanking balls left and right. They'd be framing so many balls. So it's really, really important to be careful on what we see and what we apply. So here's the two differences. Maddie's got a little bit more closer to a Western grip, whereas Ash Barty's more semi-Western. And very similar ball, very different arm position. Both have really good forehands. Very different forehands, but really good forehands. So it's not right, wrong, it's what are you trying to do and what is their grip, what is their swing path, and where are their contact zones. So it's a hopefully this is like making some sense about how you're evaluating how you're doing things, because some of you are probably more focused on teaching everyone a very similar forehand, which is okay at certain levels, but as they get higher levels, they're going to start putting their own unique aspect to it. And if you look at a 12-year-old and then you look at them again at 18, very few have the same looking forehands. If you have a look at, say, look on YouTube, if you want to see some crazy changes in forehand, look at Del Potro's forehand. Del Potro's forehand when he was 12 was nearly a full Western. And I don't know why, I don't know when, I probably need to find someone who worked with him and ask that question, is what made him change from a full Western at 12 to an Eastern very flat forehand at 17.
How tall was he when he was 12?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. Yeah, he's like every 12-year-old. He's itty bitty, and then he becomes 6'5", and life changes. You know, he can hit different balls at that point. But we've got to be careful also that we want to put an adult forehand on a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old. We want to make sure their fundamentals are sound and their contact zones are consistent, but their grips may shift as they get older. Their swing paths are definitely going to shift as they get older. So we want to be careful about trying to make an adult forehand on a 12-year-old. So too many times I think we try to do that sometimes. We try to have a finished product at 11, 12, 13, and it's a development cycle.
Should I even attempt a grip? Should I work on contact and let them form their grip and then decide from there?
That's the million-dollar question. Do you or do you not change your grip?
I start.
It's the best question that you asked, that anyone asks. I don't have an answer. I don't think any great coach has an answer. Anyone that says, yes, I change everyone to this grip at this age at this time, that's a factory, and you're going to hurt a lot more kids than you help by doing that. Because, you know, we would never have probably had all the great forehands evolutionary that happened if everyone forced them into a textbook from 15 years earlier grip that was appropriate. It goes back to the Henry Ford question. When people asked him, you know, why did you start and build a car? And he said, because he said if we kept listening to the people, they just said they'd want faster horses. Same thing with grips. You know, we have to be careful about always forcing us into what worked last generation. Every generation, there is an improvement. There's slight nuances. So your question's the right one. What grips should I use? At a beginner intermediate level, you want to simplify. You want to have less extreme grips. You know, I definitely don't think full Westerns is good when people are trying to get competent at the sport. When you're trying to get a level, especially adults, I don't think it's really valuable for adult league players to have full Westerns. I think there's just too much risk of racket position not getting in the right spot. So I'm conservative when it comes to that. When it's talking about higher level, like good juniors that are looking to play at the highest level, you should look at what's natural for them. And then also when the game speed picks up, are they going to be able to adapt? Coco's a great example. Someone who's got an extreme grip. If she would have had a slightly different grip when she was younger, she would have adapted to the faster, harder ball that she currently is struggling with a bit. And you know, it's no secret. Everyone that watches it knows that and sees that. They all play hard to her forehand deep. That's the one shot on the court that she struggles with a little bit. And her grip's pretty extreme and she hasn't adjusted her swing path. Whereas Swiatek's got the same grip as Coco, but her swing path's much shorter. She's got a much shorter take back, much shorter swing, gets through the contact zone a lot better. So she handles that hard ball much better. So those are the nuances of the grip. But in general, simple, more conservative grips are easier to get through your contact zones a little bit better. So, and also, I always say, if you suck, what's the harm? Like if you're not very good, if they're 12 and they're not making a lot of balls, they miss a lot of forehands, changing a grip shouldn't be a big decision. They're already not very good, so if you change the grip, what are they going to do, get worse? They're probably not getting a lot worse, so they can get at least a little bit better. If they're really good, that's where it gets challenging. The top 10 in the country, top 50 in the country, parents freak out, kids freak out, everyone freaks out, oh, you're changing the grip. I'm like, changing the grip this much. You go from there to there. You're not going from full Western to full Eastern usually. So I think people, overcomplicate grips in some respect or put too much emphasis that a grip change is a huge thing. If they're a good athlete, they can make a grip adjustment. You may not go full whatever you're trying to get them to on day one. It may take a month to move them over, but good athletes adapt, especially when they're young. Really, really easier than I think we give them credit for sometimes. You look at all the pros, they're changing their serve motions mid-tournament. Some people are bringing their foot up, kicking their foot back. Some people are adding lag. Some people are going shorter motion. And they're serving about the same. If you actually look at the stats, there's not a big difference there. So we know it can be done without that much difficulty, a lot of this stuff. It's just more a confidence and a mind game that you're playing with them many times. And especially if they're not doing well, it may be worth changing the grip because it gives them something to focus on, a motivating thing. Hey, let's work on this for the next 3 weeks. And it gets them excited again if they're going through a little bit of a bad patch. So it's a great question. And it's one of those ones where I don't have always a great answer. A lot of people send me video and ask me, should we change the grip? I'm like, forehand looks terrible. I don't know if it's the grip, it could be the swing, it could be, they don't move their feet, it could be a lot of different things that caused it. Because you can pretty much hit any forehand if you move really well. If you have great footwork and you set up right for the ball that's coming to you, you can just about make any grip work, if you're in the right position. Same thing, if you have terrible footwork, any grip looks terrible if you show me one shot or two shots in the forehand. So footwork still dictates a lot of this as well.
That's what we don't have a lot. I don't get the good fortune to work with a lot of really good players.
I wouldn't say good fortune. You're working with the players that we need to stay in the sport.
But rather than talk about what the pros do with their swings, I always encourage my kids to watch pros and look at their feet. Why does Kinetic have the structure that her feet never stop moving? Her knees never straighten up from the time she walks on the court until the time she leaves. And that's what I try to get them to focus on rather than...
I think that's the right way to watch the game. I don't know if everyone heard that, but it was all about Swiatek and their footwork, and that's what you should have your players watch when they're watching the pros. Less about the stroke mechanics, more about their footwork, core position, body position, because that's a bit more replicable for many of the players at the lower levels than actually the swing speeds and the stroke mechanics of some of the top pros, because it's a different sport. We know it is. Pro tennis is different than college tennis. College tennis is different than junior tennis, and adult league is completely different to all of them. So we have to be careful that we think we're all playing the same sport, but anyone like us that is in it all the time knows that we're talking about 4 different sports, and it's a completely different game. As much as it looks similar, you've got a racket and you've got a yellow thing that you're trying to hit. It's very, very different. Really, really good point. So again, just talking about the extension, because this is the one thing. If you're going to take, we've talked a lot about forehand, grip, swing paths, contact points. What are some take-homes that you want to think about? If you can get extension like that on most of your players, it's going to take care of a lot of your issues, because it means they've gone through contact zone the right way. If they're here at the same spot, if you're a pro, you can do it because you've gone through contact zones so quick and now you're looking at that. But for most of your players, if you can extend as long as possible to this position before we do this, that makes a huge difference. And my one unfortunate pet peeve about how tennis was taught for probably 25 years, how many of you were told the 3 angles? Shoulder angle at 90, elbow at 90, wrist at 90. We should never teach that. in my opinion. The reason being is that's an outcome. If we're actually over-focused on that, what are the players going to do? They're going to get there as quick as they possibly can because they want to please us. So they do this instead of doing that, and then the racket naturally finishes it. So please don't overemphasize that because it completely puts players in an idea of, I've got to get there. Coach told me you've got to finish like this. So what do? Instead of going through extension, they break off early and they finish like that. And I think that is one big fix that a lot of you can probably do, is don't even mention finish. Finish is secondary. If you want to have something at finish, catching the racket's a better cue than finishing over the shoulder.
What about the free shoulder on the forehand? Like, I'm watching my players, and like it's almost like a contact point thing. Sometimes they'll move their hand out of the way to let the ball go too late and strike it. And I see the pros, it's like it freezes at the front shoulder or the hip. Like, even if they're swinging almost wildly in the air, it's like it hits a wall at the front shoulder or their hip. But that's also like a afterwards thing.
Right. So for everyone who probably didn't hear that, I'm going to demo lefty. I'm a lefty. It's a bit easier for me to get this position accurate. Talking about the non-dominant hand and what happens as acceleration starts. So as you accelerate, so lock-in's here, you start accelerating, what does this arm do? In a lot of plays that you deal with, it flies out here and they open early and their shoulders and their hips are facing the net at contact. So their body weight is actually already going this way. That's what we see with a lot of less mature, less effective forehands. What you were mentioning and what you see on the pros, nearly all of them, is just like in boxing, just like in baseball pitching, as you start accelerating, this hand tucks in. You get this equal and opposite reaction. So as this racket comes, this hand sort of tucks in here. And that's a natural response. So if someone punctures, what happens? The opposite hand comes in. So that is what we want. Do we teach that or do we not teach that is the big argument. Because it should be a natural occurrence, but it's not in most of these plays. In most of these plays, this happens and they open up and the hand's out here. When we're here, we get into this position here, and then, you see it here. You see that hand is right here, and we want to be in that position. So we want to find that position. The question is, do we force it by a cue of some sort? Hey, tuck your elbow into your belly button. I use that on the serve a lot. So when that arm comes down, elbow into belly button versus being out here.
The interesting point of every one of these slides that you were comparing and contrasting, if you go back and look, the left hand, so the grip, so the two strokes, the elbow may have been different. If you look at the left hand, they were identical. Every single, look at where the left hand is on all these comparing contrasts.
Yep. Going back, you guys are saying the same thing, which is a really good point, Walker, about it's keeping the body position stable, the upper body's consistently under control. They haven't fallen off, they haven't fallen left. They've been able to keep that body position where they need so the racket can actually go through the contact zone for longer. It all comes down to maximizing contact zone, so you're 100% right.
So like, I think I'm worried about like the root cause of this, like why they're pulling out, like is it their eyes, like leaving their contact point too early, like, because it's a finish thing, you know, so like I think one, they're not worried about it because the ball is left, but like what do you think is causing this in all these lowest level players to
so a lot of it is they're trying to swing harder than they can control. So the moment you swing harder from the wrong part of the body, it's not that they can't swing that fast, it's that they're swinging with their upper body rather than their lower body. The good players, they swing from their lower body and this side is braced a little bit more. You see it in golf, you see it in baseball hitting, you see it in all impact sports, that you have to come through contact zone, but if you come through too early with the wrong part, you've spun out of it and your energy's going that way instead of going that way. So the biggest thing is keep the weight back a little longer is one cue. And from the standpoint of use your hips to drive the motion rather than use your upper body to drive the motion. That would be my couple cues to work on that. and I am getting the wrap it up signal. So I want to leave it to one more question if anyone's got one final thought on this. So here's just my sort of final slide if you want to take a few things to think about. Grips dictate swing paths dictate contact points. Hopefully you remember that. I really like the saying. Focus on the substance or the fundamentals, allow for the style. Just know what the difference is. Difference between style and fundamentals. I think people think style is fundamentals. I always get a lot of people talking about things and I'm like, yeah, coach that however you want. I don't really care. I'm more interested in the fundamental piece, but many times I think what they're talking about is the fundamentals. More traditional grips will result in more linear swing paths, so be careful about trying to get a linear swing path from an extreme grip. It doesn't really work, and vice versa as well. Focus on that outside or back leg when you're teaching. Make sure that that is always in your communication, whether it's visual, verbal, kinesthetic, doesn't matter, but make sure that that outside back leg is being prioritized because that's really the driver of the stroke. And then we've got the more extreme grip will result in more angular swing paths. So hopefully this is helpful. Look forward to the rest of the speakers. Again, I want to thank Bill and the team here for putting on a fantastic event. And you've got some world-class speakers. I'm looking forward to listening to the other presenters. So thank you all.